Hey everybody, this is a chapter from Nazis, Islamic Antisemitism in the Middle East, the 1948 Arab War against Israel, and the aftershocks of World War II. This is chapter 4 of the book, which is titled 1948, the Arab-Israeli War. I should say that I have hiccups, and it's going to be annoying. Hopefully, you won't hate me for it. Anyway, by the early summer of 1943, the mood in the Nazi camp was gloomy. The tide of war had turned. The Battle of Stalingrad was lost, and Rommel's forces had been defeated in North Africa. The prospect of an Allied victory loomed. In a radio speech on the 19th of March 1943, al-Husseini depicted the horrors that awaited, quote, "If, may God preserve us, the Jew-controlled Allies are victorious in this war," end quote. At the end of May 1943, one of Season's secret stations, it's Radio Season or Radio Berlin, Radio Season's secret stations, the voice of the Free Arabs echoed the sentiment, quote, "The British have not won the war yet, but we must confess that we have to prepare ourselves for the obscure future awaiting us should the British, the Jews, and their allies emerge from the war as victors. It is our duty to prepare for the future," end quote, declared the speaker in Arabic. Footnote. See Gerard Hupp, edited volume, Mufti, Papiere, Briefe, Memoranden, Reden und Aufrufe Amin al-Husseinis aus dem Exil, 1940 to 1945. Not finding any of the descriptions of this book. End footnote. Of special concern was the future of Palestine. If Nazi Germany were to fall, one should at least ensure that the Zionist project met the same fate. In his memoirs, the Mufti mentions some of the steps he took to ensure that his struggle against Zionism in Palestine could continue even after a defeat of the Third Reich. Quote, "On November 2nd, 1944, Germany agreed to supply us with arms for the approaching tasks," end quote. On November 2nd, 1944, Germany agreed to supply us with arms for the approaching tasks, end quote. Al-Husseini recounts. Quote, "And to this end created a large store with light arms suitable for guerrilla action, ... In addition, the authorities put at our disposal 4-engine airplanes for the transportation of war material to Palestine to be stored in secret shelters, for the training of Palestinian fighters, and for their preparation for the battles to follow." End quote. End quote. Amin al-Husseini. Walter Schellenberg, one of Nazi Germany's most senior intelligence officials, had selected 2 Arab and 3 German Wehrmacht officers to undertake this operation. Quote, "It was decided they must not enter into conflict with the British authorities during the war, but limit themselves to preparations for the days after the end of World War II." Quote, "It was decided that they must not enter into conflict with the British authorities during the war, but limit themselves to preparations for the days after the end of World War II." End quote. Walter Schellenberg. The planned supplies included, quote, tens of thousands of rifles, machine guns, and light weapons, and large quantities of equipment and ammunition, end quote. Footnote. Haganah Archive. The Mufti's Memoirs, Part 2. Cited by Jenny LaBelle. The Mufti of Jerusalem, cited after Jenny LaBelle, the Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, and National Socialism. One second. Okay. Anyway, back to the text and footnote. I couldn't find a good description. On the 6th of October 1944, 5 parachutists did indeed fly out from Athens to land in the Jordan Valley with the task of hiding the crates of weapons they had previously dropped from the plane. Footnote. See Haida Marie Vov Risen. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Nazis in the Holy Land, 1933 to 1948. The description of this book says, young Germans marched through Haifa shouting, quote, Hail Hitler, end quote, and swastika flags were hoisted at the German consulates of mandatory Palestine. It was in November 1931 when a non-Jewish German made the initial contact with Nazi officials in Germany that led to the establishment of a miniature Third Reich with local NS groups, Hitler Youth Program, and associations for women teachers and others in Palestine. Approximately 33% of all Palestine Germans, Palästina Deutsche, participated in the National Socialist movement. Until today, no extensive research written in English has been done on this bizarre, quote, footnote in history, while previous publications in German mainly concentrate on the members of the Temple Society. This work includes Protestants and Catholic Germans as well. It focuses on the relationship of Palästina Deutsche with local Arabs and Jews. It covers the period of 1933 to 1948, as well as the years between the establishing of the State of Israel and the departure of the last group of Germans in 1950. At the end of the book, the reader will find a list with more than 700 names of those who joined the NS groups. One second. Back to the text and footnote. Ten days later, these five parachutists were captured by the British. The 3 German officers turned out to be Palestinian Germans. The 2 Arab officers were Abdul Latif who had previously been involved in editing the Mufti's radio broadcast in Berlin, and Hassan Salameh, who led a gang in the Nablus era during the 1936 to 1939 Arab Revolt. While this may have been an isolated and ineffective action, it nonetheless provides a direct link between the Nazis' World War and the, quote, battles to follow, end quote, in Palestine. Moreover, Radio Season 2 is preparing the Muslims of the Middle East for the, quote, battles to follow, end quote. It relentlessly assailed its listeners with horror stories according to which the Jews were planning not only to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but also, starting out from their base in Palestine, to embark on the total destruction of Islam and the Arabs. Here are some of the slogans disseminated by Radio Season, Radio Berlin, between May and November 1942. Quote, "The Jews are the deadly enemies of Islam," end quote. 3rd of May 1942. Quote, "The aim of the Jews is to make the Arab countries a Jewish colony," end quote. 2nd of June 1942. Quote, "The Jews are the enemies of all Arabs and Muslims," end quote. 13th of September 1942. Quote, "The Jews are the enemies of the Arabs and the Holy Quran," end quote. 21st of October 1942. "An Allied victory will mean a victory for the Jews and the destruction of Muslims." 23rd of October 1942. "If Britain wins the war, the Jews will rule our countries and will deprive the Arabs of their freedom and independence." 14th of November 1942. Footnote. All the information is derived from the program scripts translated at the time on the initiative of the U.S. Ambassador in Cairo, Alexander Kirk. End footnote. After mid-1943, as it was becoming clear that Germany was heading for defeat, the warnings about what, quote, world Jewry, end quote, would do when it got the chance became ever shriller. In his diary entry for the 10th of May 1943, Goebbels reported on a, quote, sharpening of our anti-Semitic propaganda in the press and on the radio, ... At times it formed 70% to 80% of our entire foreign broadcasting, end quote. Footnote. See Elke Fruleff, edited volume Die Tagebücher von Joseph Goebbels, Teil 2, Band 8. Which I think is just the journals of Joseph Goebbels. The description for this book says, Joseph Goebbels kept a diary for much of his life. From 1923 to 1941, Goebbels wrote the entries himself. From 1941 to 1945, Goebbels dictated lengthy passages to aides. Goebbels sometimes telephoned them in the middle of the night when he wanted to add some text. The dictations also opened with a description of the military situation, followed by his personal comments. The dictated diary is not as personal as the earlier one he wrote himself. Much of the diaries were thought to have been lost during World War II. However, in 1922, they were discovered to be held in Soviet-era archives, as Goebbels himself had ordered his diaries to be duplicated while in the Führer bunker and buried in a nearby grove of trees, believing that one day history would laud him and would want to know about his life. There was dispute over which researcher first discovered The Soviet archives, Elke Frulich and David Irving both laying claim to the title. David Irving being a Holocaust denier, so I'm going to assume. I think these journals were originally published in 1987, so I'm not sure if that was before David Irving totally destroyed his reputation as a historian by becoming a Holocaust denier. Anyway, back to the text and footnote. In his famous Wollt ihr den totalen Krieg, Do You Want Total War speech on the 18th of February 1943, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels had conjured up before the German people the dreadful prospect of their destruction in the event of defeat. The Nazis' Arab language propaganda now began to scaremonger in the same terms about the consequences of an Allied victory for the Arabs. Finally, money the Mufti had received from the Nazis in the later stages of the war was redirected toward the new, quote, battles, end quote, of the post-war period. Before 1945, according to his biographer, Joseph Schechtman, quote, with astute foresight, the Mufti managed to get a large proportion of the Nazi subsidies out of Germany even while the war was still in progress, end quote, transferring it to Switzerland and Iraq. Joseph Schechtman, it says here, was lived from 1891 to 1970 and is a Russian-born revisionist Zionist activist, historian, and author. He played a significant role in the establishment of the World Union of Revisionist Zionists and the New Zionist Organization alongside Zev Jabotinsky. Schechtman authored numerous works on Jewish history, Zionism, and population migrations, including the Arab refugee problem and European population transfers, 1939 to 1945. Joseph Schechtman's studies on population transfers, described as, quote, pioneering, end quote, in defining guidelines for such movements, have been both influential and controversial. Joseph Schechtman emigrated to the United States during World War II, continuing his advocacy and scholarship while working with organizations such as the Jewish Agency for Israel and the Office of Strategic Services. Joseph Schechtman's book, Mufti and the Fuhrer, Rise and Fall of Haj Amin al-Husseini, says, Haj Amin al-Husseini was perhaps the most spectacular political figure in the Middle East. During the years between the First and Second World Wars, thoroughly documented full-length biography. This illustrated book recaptures a stormy life of high adventure, a life with recurrent pattern of spectacular ups and downs, not easily matched in recent history. It's a terrible description. Back to the text and footnote. Walter Schellenberg admitted during the Nuremberg war crimes trial that he alone had given the Mufti, quote, half a metric hundredweight of gold and $50,000, end quote. Quote, the Mufti took it all with him, end quote, added Walter Schellenberg. who also referred to the Mufti's, quote, excellent, end quote, contacts in Switzerland. Footnote, see Robert Kempner, SS im Kreuzverhör. Not really seeing a description for this book. Back to the text. The Nazi Foreign Office had invested in the post-1945 period. At first, as late as April 1945, the Nazi Foreign Office gave the Mufti 50,000 Reichsmarks, money which the Mufti put to effective use in his anti-Jewish campaign between 1946 and 1948. Footnote, see Klaus Genziker, der Mufti von Jerusalem und die Nationalsozialistischen, Nationalsozialisten, eine politische Biografie Amin al-Husseinis. The description for this book says, Amin al-Husseini is undeniably one of the key figures of the 20th century. Amin al-Husseini was the religious head of the Palestinian Muslims for 16 years, their political leader for 30 years, and for a time he was the most important representative of the Arab world. Author Klaus Genziker examines the time that Amin al-Husseini spent in Nazi Germany from 1941 to 1945. He looks at what the Mufti was hoping to gain politically and ideologically while he was there. Al-Husseini cooperated eagerly with the Nazis to prevent Jews emigrating from Europe to Palestine. Aware of what was happening, he wanted to see the Jews destroyed. Amin al-Husseini also expected a high position for himself in the Arab world after the Nazis had won the Second World War. Germany's enemies became his enemies, and he waged a campaign of hate against the British and Americans, who were, he claimed, pawns of the Jews. This began the path towards anti-Americanism and the struggle against, quote, Western depravity, end quote, in the name of Islam. The book shows how he used murder, terrorism, intrigue, extortion, and abuse of religion to obtain his goals. His greed for wealth, hunger for power, despotism, ruthlessness, and intransigence were all factors that brought disaster upon his people and have, unfortunately, set a standard that remains valid in Palestinian politics today. Back to the text and footnote. Second, the Nazi Foreign Office stated in writing its readiness to pay the Mufti 12,000 marks a month, even after the 1st of April 1945, an arrangement that shows that, quote, Nazi officials, hope to continue their joint or complementary political ideological campaigns in the post-war period, end quote. Footnote. See Richard Breitman and Norman J.W. Goda, Hitler's Shadow, Nazi War Criminals, U.S. Intelligence in the Cold War. published in 2010. The description of this book says, authors Brightman and Godin note here that newly released CIA and Army records produce new, quote, evidence of war crimes and about wartime activities of war criminals, post documents on the search for war criminals, documents about the escape of war criminals, documents about the Allied protection or use of war criminals, and documents about the post-war activities of war criminals. This volume of essays includes new information on major Nazi figures, Nazis in the Middle East, new materials on former Gestapo officers, the CIC and right-wing shadow politics, collaborators, Allied intelligence, and the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, originally published by the National Archives. Back to the text and footnote. But was al-Husseini in a position to pursue his anti-Zionist activities? What became of this man who had done more than anyone to infect the mass of Muslims with the virus of anti-Semitism before and during the war, after the unconditional surrender of the Third Reich? On the 7th of May 1945, the Mufti fled to Bern on advice of the German Foreign Office. Upon arrival in Switzerland, the authorities immediately handed the Mufti over to France. There, in France, the Mufti was placed in a villa near Paris, from which the Mufti was able to make an easy escape and fly to Cairo at the end of May 1946. Footnote, the Mufti's, quote, house arrest, and, quote, in France was, quote, so lax that he was able to escape with relative ease and return to the Middle East, end quote. See Jeffrey Herf, Israel's Moment, International Support for and Opposition to Establishing the Jewish State, 1945 to 1949. The description for this book says, Israel's Moment is a major new account of how a Jewish state came to be forged in the shadow of World War II and the Holocaust and the onset of the Cold War. Drawing on new research in government, public, and private archives, Jeffrey Herf exposes the political realities that underpin support for and opposition to Zionist aspirations in Palestine, an unprecedented international account. He explores the role of the United States, the Arab states, the Palestine Arabs, the Zionists, and key European governments from Britain and France to the Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. Herf's findings reveal a spectrum of support and opposition that stood in sharp contrast to the political coordinates that emerged during the Cold War, shedding new light on how and why the State of Israel was established in 1948, and challenging conventional associations of left and right, imperialism and anti-imperialism, and racism and anti-racism. Back to the text and footnote. In Cairo, the Mufti had to remain in hiding for some weeks since, at least on paper, Mufti was being sought as a war criminal by Britain, Yugoslavia, and the United States. Husseini was, moreover, the target of major anti-Nazi campaigns. Thus, a memorandum from the American Zionist Emergency Council, dated the 12th of December 1945, states that, quote, in the case of practically all the Axis criminals, an end has, as far as we know, been put on their ability to cause additional damage. But the ex-mufti, should he escape punishment, will undoubtedly be in a position to stir up further trouble and to cause more massacres of Jews. It is earnestly hoped that our government will realize the serious moral responsibility which, it would share for the loss of human lives and for the other grave consequences which would result from a policy of allowing the mufti to go unpunished for his past crimes and free to commit new ones, end quote. American Zionist Emergency Council, 1945. There is no lack of grounds for putting him on trial. As an active supporter of the, quote, final solution, end quote, the Mufti have repeatedly intervened to block Jews from escaping the Holocaust. Thus he had actively opposed plans for Jewish children from Slovakia, Poland, Hungary, and Bulgaria to be allowed to travel to Palestine. Instead, al-Husseini recommended that these children be sent to the gas chambers, or in his own words, to quote, where they are subject to strong control, e.g. Poland, end quote. At the end of 1942, when Romania wanted to allow 80,000 Jews to emigrate to Palestine to return for a per capita payment, in return for a per capita payment, the Mufti stepped in again to derail the scheme. Moreover, al-Husseini had recruited the Bosnian Muslim Handschar SS division that had fought the Yugoslav Partians with extreme cruelty, hunted Jews in Croatia, and murdered Bosnian civilians. Wikipedia says the 13th Waffen Mountain Division of the SS Handschar, 1st Croatian, was a mountain infantry division of the Waffen SS, an armed branch of the German Nazi Party that served alongside but was never formally part of the Wehrmacht during World War II. At the post-war Nuremberg trials, the Waffen SS was declared to be a criminal organization due to its major involvement in war crimes and crimes against humanity. From March to December 1944, the division fought a counterinsurgency campaign against communist-led Yugoslav partisan resistance forces in the independent state of Croatia, a fascist puppet state of Germany that encompassed almost all of modern-day Croatia, all of modern-day Bosnia and Herzegovina, and parts of Serbia. The division was named Handschar after a local fighting knife or scimitar carried by Ottoman policemen during the centuries that the region was part of the Ottoman Empire. It was the first non-Germanic Waffen SS division, and its formation marked the expansion of the Waffen SS into a multi-ethnic military force. Composed mainly of Bosnian Muslims with some Catholic Croats, The mostly German and Yugoslav Volksdeutsche officers and non-commissioned officers. The members of the division took an oath of allegiance to the German Führer Adolf Hitler and the Croatian Poglavnik Ante Pavelic. The division fought briefly in the Sirmia region north of the Sava River before crossing into northeastern Bosnia. After crossing the Sava, it established a designated, quote, security zone, end quote, in northeastern Bosnia between the Sava, Bosna, Drina, and Sprecha, I'm guessing, rivers. It also fought outside the security zone on several occasions and earned a reputation for brutality and savagery, not only during combat operations but also for atrocities committed against Serb and Jewish civilians. In late 1944, parts of the division were transferred to the Zagreb area, and non-German members began to desert in large numbers. Over the winter of 1944 to 45, the unit was sent to the Baranja region, where it fought against the Red Army and Bulgarians throughout southern Hungary. Fought back via a series of defensive lines until they were inside the Reich frontier. Most of the remaining Bosnian Muslims left at this point and attempted to return to Bosnia. The rest retreated further west, hoping to surrender to the Western Allies. Most of the remaining members became prisoners of the British Army. Subsequently, 38 officers were extradited to Yugoslavia to face criminal charges, and 10 were executed. Hundreds of former members of the division fought in the 1947-48 Civil War in Mandatory Palestine and the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Back to the text. Despite these crimes and despite the anti-Mufti campaigns, the Allied victors refused to indict al-Husseini as a war criminal and so risk conflict with the Arab world. Just as during the war they had shied away from combating Radio Season's anti-Semitism out of opportunism, so now the Allied victors once again failed to make an issue out of the Mufti's Jew hatred. This omission would have serious consequences. To quote Jeffrey Herf, quote, "The absence of a trial and punishment enabled the leading voice of Arab extremism and radical anti-Semitism to be welcomed home to the Middle East as a hero of an anti-imperialist struggle rather than as a disgraced collaborator with Nazism and Nazism's crimes against the Jews." End quote. Jeffrey Herf. New section. The Muslim Brotherhood and the Mufti. As we saw in Chapter 2, in summer 1937, shortly after the attempt to arrest the Mufti, London had dissolved the Arab Higher Committee that the Mufti had headed, leaving the Arabs in Palestine leaderless. The Arab League, founded in 1944 by Egypt, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Syria, Transjordan, and Lebanon, nonetheless considered it important that Palestine be represented. In November 1945, they therefore established a new Palestinian Arab Higher Authority Committee with a balanced composition. 5 supporters and 5 opponents of al-Husseini, plus 2 neutrals. Wikipedia says the Arab League, officially the League of Arab States, is a regional organization in the Arab world. The Arab League was formed in Cairo on the 22nd of March 1945 initially with 7 members: Egypt, Iraq, Transjordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and North Yemen. Currently, the Arab League has 22 members. The League's main goal is to, quote, draw closer the relations between member states and coordinate collaboration between them to safeguard their independence and sovereignty, and to consider in a general way the affairs and interests of the Arab countries, end quote. The organization has received a relatively low level of cooperation throughout its history. Through institutions, notably the Arab League Educational, Cultural, and Scientific Organization, and the Economic and Social Council of its Council of Arab Economic Unity, the League facilitates political, economic, cultural, scientific, and social programs designed to promote the interests of the Arab world. It has served as a forum for the member states to coordinate policy, arrange studies of and committees as to matters of common concern, settle interstate disputes, and limit conflicts such as the 1958 Lebanon crisis. The League has served as a platform for the drafting and conclusion of many landmark documents promoting economic integration. One example is the Joint Arab Economic Action Charter, which outlines the principles for economic activities in the region. Each member state has 1 vote in the Council of the Arab League, and decisions are binding only for those states that have voted for them. The aims of the League in 1945 were to strengthen and coordinate the political, cultural, economic, and social programs of its members, and to mediate disputes among them or between them and third parties. Furthermore, the signing of an agreement on joint defense and economic cooperation on the 13th of April 1950 committed the signatories to coordination of military defense measures. In March 2015, the Arab League General Secretary announced the establishment of a joint Arab force with the aim of counteracting extremism and other threats to Arab states. The decision was reached while Operation Decisive Storm was intensifying in Yemen. Participating in the project is voluntary, and the Army intervenes only at the request of one of the member states. Existing military cooperation between Arab League states and regional civil wars and terrorist threats were the impetus for the JAF's establishment. In the early 1970s, the Economic Council put forward a proposal to create the Joint Arab Chambers of Commerce across international states that led to the setting up of mandates to promote, encourage, and facilitate bilateral trade between the Arab world and significant trading partners. I also wanted to look up New Palestinian Arab Hire Committee. The Arab Hire Committee, I'm just going to read the introduction. The Wikipedia. The Arab Hire Committee, or the Higher National Committee, was the central political organ of Palestinian Arabs in Mandatory Palestine. It was established on the 25th of April 1936 on the initiative of Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and comprised the leaders of Palestinian Arab clans and political parties under the Mufti's chairmanship. The committee was outlawed by the British Mandatory Administration in September 1937 after the assassination of a British official. A committee of the same name was reconstituted by the Arab League in 1945, but went to abeyance after it proved ineffective during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The Arab League, the new Arab Hire Committee was sidestepped by Egypt and the Arab League with the formation of the All-Palestine Government in 1948, and both were banned by Jordan. Okay. Back to the text. By the end of May 1946, al-Husseini himself arrived in Cairo. Al-Husseini's return was greeted not only by the Muslim Brotherhood, but by secular forces. The preparations for the Mufti's return had begun several weeks previously, and it was likely no accident that a meeting of the Arab League in the Syrian resort of Bludan coincided with the event. These hiccups, man. Footnote. Wikipedia says, Nazis, Islamists, and the Making of the Modern East is a controversial 2014 Yale University press book by German historian Wolfgang G. Schwanitz and Israeli historian Barry Rubin. The authors argue that there is a high degree of similarity in the ideologies of Nazism, radical Arab nationalism, and Islamism. The book received a mixed reception, and with some historians criticizing the author's methodology and conclusions. Back to the text. That conference reached a surprising decision following an Egyptian proposal. An entirely new Palestinian body, the so-called Arab Higher Executive Committee of Palestine, was established, but this time under the leadership of Amin al-Husseini and his cousin Jamal al-Husseini. Jamal al-Husseini lived from 1849 to 1982. He was born in Jerusalem and a member of the Husseini family. Husseini served as secretary to the Executive Committee of the Palestine Arab Congress, 1921 to 1934, and to the Muslim Supreme Council. Husseini was coordinator and chairman of the Palestine Arab Party, established in Jerusalem in 1935, and in 1937 became a member of the Arab Higher Committee, led by Amin al-Husseini, later becoming its chairman. During the 1936-39 Arab Revolt, Jamal al-Husseini escaped first to Syria and then to Baghdad, Iraq. Jamal al-Husseini led the Arab delegation to the 1939 London Conference and was Palestinian representative of the Anglo-American Committee of Inquiry. Husseini was arrested by the British in 1941 and exiled to southern Rhodesia. Jamal al-Husseini was released at the end of World War II and returned to Palestine in 1946. Jamal al-Husseini was an unofficial delegate to the United Nations in 1947-48. In September-October 1948, he was foreign minister in the Egyptian-sponsored All-Palestine government. Back to the text. The Mufti's opponents were excluded. We do not yet know how this decision came about or what positions the various actors took towards it behind closed doors. It is certain that, quote, the Bludan decision resembled a seizure of power or coup, except that here it involved not a state but the leadership of a national movement, end quote, writes David Schiller, while the Mufti's biographer, Joseph Schechtman, talks of a, quote, Bludan diktat that, quote, was a complete victory for the Mufti. Footnote. See Mahmoud Mohammed Khalil, The Arab States and the Arab League, Volume 2, International Affairs, published in Beirut, 1962. And footnote C. Schiller, Palästinenser zwischen Terrorismus und Diplomatie, published in 1982. There's not really a good description for this book. Back to the text and footnote. Although at British request, Amin al-Husseini was not allowed to set foot in the Palestine Mandate territory, the Arab League decision now enthroned him as the new leader of the Palestinian Arabs, with access to an annual budget of 10,000 British pounds. Footnote, see the article by Joseph Nevo, The Arabs of Palestine, 1947-48, Military and Political Activity, published in Middle Eastern Studies, January 1987. And footnote. For the Jews in Palestine, this decision was a blatant provocation, while the Palestinian Arabs saw their last chance of a policy not dictated by the Mufti slip away. As a result, between 1946 and 1948, the terrorism that had crushed the supporters of the first partition plan resumed. Quote, the Mufti and his associates tolerated neither criticism nor opposition, even in non-political contexts, and did not hesitate to use pressure, violence, and even murder to crush any reserve or disapproval. Anyone who broke the consensus of non-recognition of Jewish rights, or was even suspected of doing so, exposed himself to threats, end quote. Joseph Nevo, from the article Arabs of Palestine, 1947-48, Military and Political Activity. One victim was Fawzi Darwish al-Husseini, a respected personage and cousin of the Mufti. Wikipedia says Fawzi Husseini died in 1946, was a Palestinian Arab political figure notable for the leadership of the New Palestine Society and his interest in the political program of binationalism in Palestine during the Mandate period. Back to the text. Fawzi al-Husseini sought agreement with representatives of the Jewish Agency on a binational state in which neither nation would dominate. On the 11th of November 1946, 5 members of Fawzi's group signed an accord on common activities with Jews. 12 days later, Fawzi was murdered by the Mufti's henchmen and his group disintegrated. Quote, my cousin strayed and received his just punishment, end quote, commented Jamal al-Husseini. Another was Sami Taha, a prominent trade union leader from Haifa, who advocated giving Jews certain rights, and for this very reason was murdered in September 1947. Wikipedia says Sami Taha lived from 1916 to 1947 and was a leading Palestinian Arab leader during the period of British rule. Sami Taha had been remembered as a, quote, young leader of trades unionists in Palestine who was building one of the best working class movements in the Arab world, and he went on into opposition to the Mufti, end quote. During the late British Mandate, he was assassinated in 1947. Footnote. Walter Lacour, A History of Zionism, published 1972. The description for this book says, "The definitive general history of the Zionist movement by one of the most distinguished historians of our time, Walter Lacour traces Zionism from Zionism's beginnings, with the emancipation of European Jewry from the ghettos in the wake of the French Revolution, to 1948 when the Zionist dream became a reality. Walter Lacour describes the contributions of such notable figures as Benjamin Disraeli, Moses Hess, Baron Edmund de Rothschild, and Sir Herbert Samuel, and he analyzes the seminal achievements of Theodor Herzl, Chaim Weizmann, David Ben-Gurion. Walter Lacour outlines the differences between the various Zionist philosophies of the early 20th century, socialist, communist, revisionist, and cultural utopian, and he discusses both the religious and secular Jewish critics of the movement. He concludes with a dramatic account of the cataclysmic events of World War II, the clandestine emigration of Holocaust survivors, the tragic missed opportunities for coexistence with both the Arab residents of Palestine and those in surrounding countries, and the struggle to forge a new state on an ancient land. Lacour's new preface analyzes the present-day difficulties and places them into a fascinating and valuable historical context." Back to the text and footnote. In the same year, when UNSCOP, United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, tried to obtain information about the situation in Palestine, the Arab Higher Executive Committee threatened to kill anyone who spoke with the UN representatives. Footnote. See Benny Morris, 1948, The First Arab-Israeli War. The description of this book says, "This history of the foundation of war in the Arab-Israeli conflict is groundbreaking, objective, and deeply revisionist. Riveting account of the military engagement also focuses on the war's political dimensions. Benny Morris probes the motives and aims of the protagonists on the basis of newly opened Israeli and Western documentation. The Arab side, where the archives are still closed, is illuminated with help of intelligence and diplomatic materials." Back to the text. I wanted to look this up. Wikipedia says, "The United Nations Special Committee on Palestine was created on the 15th of May, 1947, in response to a United Kingdom government request that the General Assembly, quote, make recommendations on Article 10 of the Charter concerning the future of Palestine," end quote. The British government had also recommended the establishment of a special committee to prepare a report for the General Assembly. The General Assembly adopted the recommendation to set up the UNSCOP, or the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, to investigate the cause of the conflict in Palestine and, if possible, devise a solution. The United Nations Special Committee on Palestine was made up of representatives of 11 countries. The United Nations Special Committee on Palestine visited Palestine and gathered testimony from Zionist organizations in Palestine and in the U.S. The Arab Higher Committee boycotted the commission, explaining that the Palestinian Arabs' natural rights were self-evident and could not continue to be subject to investigation, but rather deserve to be recognized on the basis of the principle of the United Nations Charter. The report of the committee dated the 3rd of September 1947 supported the termination of the British mandate in Palestine. It contained a majority proposal for a plan of partition into 2 independent states, with an economic union, and a minority proposal for a plan for a federal union with Jerusalem as its capital. The majority plan was supported by 7 of the 11 members, with Iran, India, and Yugoslavia voting against it, and Australia abstaining. Bracket citation needed, end bracket. Following the report's release, the ad hoc committee on the Palestinian question was appointed by the General Assembly. On the 29th of November, the General Assembly adopted Resolution 181, a slight modification of the recommendations proposed to the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine. Majority plan. Back to the text. Back to the text. However, the Mufti was unpopular not only with many Palestinian Arabs, but also with most Arab rulers. Al-Husseini's extremism was, quote, at least if not more harmful to the Arabs than to the Jews, end quote, commented the Arab League's Secretary General Abd al-Rahman Azam. Wikipedia says Abdul Rahman Hassan Assam, who lived from 1893 to 1976, also known as Azam Pasha, was an Egyptian diplomat and politician. He was the first Secretary General of the Arab League from the 22nd of March 1945 to September 1952. Azam also had a long career as an ambassador and parliamentarian. Abdul Rahman Hassan Azam was an Egyptian nationalist, one of the foremost proponents of pan-Arab idealism, and opposed the partition of Palestine. Back to the text. Footnote. Ephraim Karsh, Palestine Betrayed, published in 2010. The description of this book says, the 1947 UN resolution to partition Palestine irrevocably changed the political landscape of the Middle East, giving rise to 6 full-fledged wars, countless between Arabs and Jews, countless armed clashes, blockades, and terrorism, as well as a profound shattering of Palestinian Arab society. Its origins and that of the wider Arab-Israeli conflict are deeply rooted in Jewish-Arab confrontation and appropriation in Palestine. But the isolated occasions of violence during the British Mandate era, 1920 to 1948, suggest that the majority of Palestinian Arabs yearn to live and thrive under peaceful coexistence with the evolving Jewish national enterprise. So what was the real cause of the breakdown in relations between the two communities? In this brave and groundbreaking work, Ephraim Karsh tells the story from both the Arab and Jewish perspectives. He argues that from the early 1920s onward, a corrupt and extremist leadership worked toward eliminating the Jewish national revival and protecting its own interest. Ephraim Karsh has mined many of the Western Soviet, UN, and Israeli documents declassified over the past decades, as well as unfamiliar Arab sources to reveal what happened behind the scenes on both Palestinian and Jewish sides. is an arresting story of delicate political and diplomatic maneuvering by leading figures Ben-Gurion, Hashemi Husseini, Abdel Rahman Azam, King Abdullah, Bevan, and Truman over the years leading up to partition. Through the slide to war and its enduring consequences, Palestine Betrayed is vital reading for understanding the origin of disputes that remain crucial today. Back to the text and footnote. Egypt's Prime Minister Ismail Sidki described al-Husseini as a, quote, schemer seeking his own personal interest, bracket, who, and bracket, couldn't care less if the entire Arab world were destroyed so long as he achieved his own goals, end quote. Ismail, I don't know how to say it, Sidki Pasha, was an Egyptian politician who served as prime minister from Egypt from 1930 to 1933, and again in 1946. Back to the text. Abdullah of Transjordan held him responsible for the, quote, misery, end quote, in Palestine, while the Saudi king, Ibn Saud, banned the Mufti from his country. It is all the more surprising, therefore, that the Arab League should decide to appoint al-Husseini leader of the Arabs in Palestine. Why did it do so? Despite his unpopularity among sections of the Arab elite, in 1946 Amin al-Husseini's fame was at its height. His speeches on Radio Season and a photo of him talking with Adolf Hitler had been massively disseminated by the Nazis, had given him unrivaled celebrity throughout the Arab world. Very many Arabs beyond the ranks of the Muslim Brotherhood hailed al-Husseini as a charismatic hero who defied not only the British arrest warrant of 1937, but also the extradition requests of London, Belgrade, and Washington in 1945. Quote, the impunity of his deeds has lifted his prestige amongst the Arabs, end quote. Simon Wiesenthal reported in 1947, quote, a man, who is the enemy number one of a powerful empire, and this empire cannot keep him away, seems to them to be exactly the right kind of, quote, leader, end quote. Simon Wiesenthal. Simon Wiesenthal, lived from 1908 to 2005 and was an Austrian Holocaust survivor, Nazi hunter, and writer. Simon Wiesenthal studied architecture and was living in Lvov at the outbreak of World War II. Simon Wiesenthal survived the Janovska concentration camp late 1941 to September 1944, the Krakow-Plazov concentration camp, September to October 1944, the Gross-Rosen concentration camp, a death march to Chemnitz, Buchenwald, and Mauthausen concentration camp, February to May 1945. After the war, Simon Wiesenthal dedicated his life to tracking down and gathering information on fugitive Nazi war criminals so they could be brought to trial. In 1947, Simon Wiesenthal co-founded the Jewish Historical Documentation Center in Linz, Austria, where Simon Wiesenthal and others gathered information of future war crime trials and aided Jewish refugees in their search for lost relatives. Simon Wiesenthal opened the Documentation Center of the Association of Jewish Victims of the Nazi Regime in Vienna in 1961 and continued to try to locate missing Nazi war criminals. Simon Wiesenthal played a small role in locating Adolf Eichmann, who was captured by Mossad in Buenos Aires in 1960, and worked closely with the Austrian Justice Ministry to prepare a dossier on Franz Stengel, who was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1971. In the 1970s and 1980s, Wiesenthal was involved in two high-profile events involving Austrian politicians. Shortly after Bruno Kreisky, a social democrat, was inaugurated as Austrian Chancellor in April 1970, Wiesenthal pointed out to the press that 4 of his new cabinet appointees had been members of the Nazi Party. Kreisky, angry, called Wiesenthal a, quote, Jewish fascist, end quote, likened his organization to the mafia, and accused him of collaborating with the Nazis. Simon Wiesenthal successfully sued for libel, the suit ending in 1989. In 1986, Wiesenthal was involved in the case of Kurt Waldheim, whose service in the Wehrmacht was probable knowledge of the Holocaust were revealed in the lead-up to the 1986 Austrian presidential elections. Wiesenthal, embarrassed that he had previously cleared Waldheim of any wrongdoing, suffered negative publicity as a result of this event. With a reputation as a storyteller, Wiesenthal is the author of several memoirs containing tales that are only loosely based on actual events. In particular, Wiesenthal exaggerated his role in the capture of Eichmann in 1960. Wiesenthal died in his sleep at age 96 in Vienna in 2005 and was buried at the Herzliya in Israel. The Simon Wiesenthal Center, headquartered in Los Angeles, is named in his honor. Back to the text. The Muslim Brotherhood built on and further fueled this mood. Since the Mufti's detention in May 1945, the Muslim Brotherhood had tirelessly defended and extolled al-Husseini and threatened anyone who dared to stand up to him. Thus, in response to a rumor that the Zionists had sentenced the Mufti to death, the Brotherhood declared that, quote, one hair on the Muftis is worth more than the Jews of the whole world. ... Should one hair of the Muftis be touched, every Jew in the world would be killed without mercy, end quote. This terrible threat was made at a time when the revelations about the Shoah had already made the headlines throughout the world, including in Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood had already in the 1930s grown into a massive movement on the back of its anti-Semitic Palestine campaigns. They had been materially and ideologically supported by the Nazis in this process. By the end of 1945, the Muslim Brotherhood had 1,500 branches and 500,000 members in Egypt alone, making it the world's largest anti-Semitic movement. By 1948, membership had risen to over 1 million. Footnotes. See Abd al-Fattah, M.L.Y.Z., The Muslim Brothers and the Palestine Question, 1928 to 1947. And the description for this book says, founded in 1928 in Egypt and still an important factor in Middle Eastern politics, the Muslim Brothers Society was a precursor of contemporary Islamist movements in the Arab world. This book presents a detailed history of the Muslim Brotherhood's involvement in the Palestine question, an episode that was equally significant both for its own development and for the subsequent and in recent years dramatic growth of the Islamic element in Palestinian politics. Using a wide range of documentary sources, supplemented by interviews, the author provides an account of the ideology of the movement, the evolution of its organizational structure, and the various means by which it disseminated its message. Back to the text and footnote. Second. Their ideology, where am I? The Muslim Brotherhood had offshoots in Syria, Jordan, Palestine, and Lebanon, and inspired fear. An American Secret Service report from September 1947 describes the Brotherhood as a society of, quote, anti-Occidental religious fanatics, thus powerful enough to arouse 70 million devout Muslims in this world, in this part of the world, end quote. Their ideology was then is now marked by Islamic Antisemitism. Quote, the hostility of the society to the Jews had its origin in a particular reading of the Quran, and the prophetic tradition, end quote. For them, the conflict in Palestine was not territorial, but, quote, one between Islam and Judaism, end quote. Quote, they emphasized that jihad in the way of God and the defense of the Holy Land was an inescapable religious duty. Al-Awasi. While not a member of the Brotherhood, Amit al-Husseini had been on friendly terms with its leader, Hassan al-Banna, since 1927. Husseini's daughter was married to one of the Muslim Brotherhood's leaders. Al-Husseini voices gratitude for the Brotherhood's support with these words of praise. Quote, I believe in the Muslim Brothers as they are the troops of God and shall defeat the troops of Satan, end quote. Indeed, the Mufti's very return to Egypt was a result of Brotherhood campaigning, a success which the Muslim Brotherhood celebrated exuberantly, comparing al-Husseini to the Prophet Muhammad. Quote, O Amin, what a great, stubborn, terrific, wonderful man you are, exclamation point. ... What a hero, what a miracle of a man. ... He is but one man, but Muhammad was also one man, and so is Christ, and they achieved great results. ... There must be a divine purpose behind the preservation of the life of this man. ... Amin. March on. God is with you. We are behind you. We are willing to sacrifice our necks for the cause. To death! Exclamation point. Forward march. End quote. Then, upon hearing in June 1946 of the Mufti's return to Egypt, the Brotherhood began to bombard the delegates to the Arab League meeting in Blue Dawn with pro-Mufti telegrams. Combined with the power political calculations of certain Arab leaders, these pro-Mufti campaigns and the Brotherhood's potential for making trouble made a major contribution to the fact that the Arab League chose the Mufti and the Mufti alone to lead the Palestinian Arabs. Footnote: by protecting the Mufti, Egypt and Saudi Arabia wished to counter the ambitions of their common rival, Emir Abdullah of Jordan, an opponent of the Mufti. End footnote. This decision was, however, not only challenged by Palestinian Arabs, but also within the United Nations, which in May 1947 had to decide whom to authorize to represent Palestine's Arabs alongside the Jewish Agency. Where am I? In regard to this matter, Poland's ambassador to the United Nations, Alfred Fiderkiewicz, I don't know if I'm saying that right, himself a survivor of Auschwitz, on the 2nd of May called on the United Nations, quote, to examine the political role of former Nazi collaborators whose very political record makes Arab-Jewish cooperation impossible and whose political record forbids any real cooperation with them by the United Nations, end quote. Wikipedia says Alfred Fiderkiewicz, I don't know if I'm saying that right. He lived from 1886 to 1972, was a Polish activist of the labor movement, socialist politician, physician, diplomat, and Auschwitz survivor. In the same vein, Moshe Shertok, the representative of the Jewish Agency, pointed out that Amin al-Husseini was, quote, was directly involved during the war in the Nazi policy of the extermination of the Jews of Europe, end quote. Wikipedia says Moshe Shertok was the second Prime Minister of Israel and the country's first foreign minister. He signed the Israeli Declaration of Independence and was a principal negotiator in the ceasefire agreements that concluded the Israeli War of Independence. Beginning in 1933, Moshe Shertok headed the political department of the Jewish Agency. He also founded the Jewish Brigade, which fought the British Army during World War II. A member of Mapai, Sherot's term was both preceded and succeeded by the premiership of David Ben-Gurion. And Mapai, if you don't know, according to Wikipedia, was a labor Zionist and democratic socialist political party in Israel and was the dominant force in Israeli politics until its merger into the Israeli Labor Party in January 1968. During Mapai's time in office, a wide range of progressive reforms were carried out, as characterized by the establishment of a welfare state and new rights in the workplace. Back to the text. A few hours later, however, Emil Guri, representing the Arab Higher Executive Committee, turned the tables. According to Emil Guri, the Zionists had persecuted the Mufti so relentlessly that he had been compelled to turn to Germany, quote, in self-defense, unquote. Wikipedia says Emil Guri was a Palestinian politician who served as Secretary General of the Arab Higher Committee, the official leadership of Arabs in Palestine. Back to the text. Quote, this was the only alternative to arrest and exile which were being urged on Great Britain by the Zionists. His sole crime was that he had stood in the way of Zionist aims. End quote. Emil Guri. It is striking that Guri, precisely in the framework of the United Nations, and only 2 years after the Holocaust, felt able to present the, quote, Zionists, end quote, as the perpetrators and Mufti as their victims. Regardless, the United Nations recognized the Mufti and his accomplices as the representatives of the Palestinian Arabs. Okay, that's going to be part 1 of this video. Of this chapter. There will be another video for it.